Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, wherever you are in the world. Thank you for joining us. This is the Fin Partners Conversations in Health series. We're kicking off 2023. We'll have a series of conversations every month. And this month, we're starting off with an outlook on the digital health investments that have been going on, both for 2022 and the outlook for 2023. Thank you for joining us. I'm Ritesh Patel. I'm the senior partner here at Fin and in the global digital health practice. Very kind of you to all join us. We're hitting up to 70 people. This is really good. Thank you, everyone. First of all, a bit of housekeeping. You know, we've got a really good set of speakers. We're joined by Julien, who's the CEO and founder of Galen Growth, who are responsible for the report, Bashe, who's our chair, Global Health, and Cheryl Cheng at Vive Collective, who's got a lot of investment that she does. I will be the host today for you. A couple of housekeeping things. First of all, chat with us. Let us know where you're from. This way we know that you know how to use the chat function on Zoom. Reason being, that's how you can interact with us as we go through this conversation. So let us know where are you joining us from and what's the weather like where you are at the moment. Let's see if we can see this coming into the chat. And the Q&A. There we go. Look at that. Well done. Chat is disabled. Not a good sign. Let's use Q&A then for now. I don't know why the chat is disabled. It shouldn't be. But yeah, please send it in the Q&A then, which leads me to the next one. First of all, hello, Philly, New York. Yes, it's nice and sunny here in New York for a change. Kinjal, thank you for joining us in DC. Very nice of you to join us. New York and sunny. Denver, freezing. Austin, Texas, rainy. I'll be there for South by Southwest this year. So hopefully it'll be warming by the time I get there in the end of March. Aaron down in sunny Florida. Right, good. So if you want to interact with us, apologies for the chat function being disabled. We'll figure that out technically. In the meantime, use the Q&A. If you want to have a conversation with us, if you hear something that the panelists say and you want a deeper dive in it, just put it in the Q&A. We'll get to it. We'll answer that question either by typing it or answer it live. We'll make sure we keep an eye on that. So thank you very much for bearing with us on the chat being disabled, but please use the Q&A session. Look at that. Somebody in Basel saying the birds are singing. Well done. Breckenridge. Hello, Georgine Stefanik. My goodness, haven't heard from you or seen you for a while. Terry Mead out in Silicon Valley. Haven't seen you for a while. Risa, thank you for joining us. I hope things are going well. Great. So use the Q&A to engage with us. And without further ado, I will stop sharing and we will kick off this webinar. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining me. We've got an hour to regale everybody who's watching, about 94 of them so far, around what we're seeing with respect to the digital health investment landscape. I'd like to start with Julien de Salaberry. Julien, Galen Growth, responsible for the data. Maybe you can give us a little bit background on, the kind of data you collect, the depth and you get into in these reports, etc. So people have a good framework and benchmark of where this data is coming from.
With pleasure, Ritesh, and thank you very much for the opportunity to share this with this great audience.
Sorry, quick intro from you. I apologize. I didn't do the intros. Please.
No worries. I'm Julien de Salaberry. I'm the CEO and the founder of Galen Growth, and Galen Growth is now the world leader in digital health, private market data, intel, and insights. We've built a platform that is essentially the greatest catalog of digital health ventures across the globe. And for each venture, we have the most, I guess, an unmatched data library of data for each of these ventures, thus enabling us to essentially power the redaction, the drafting, I guess, of these reports, and working closely with organizations like Fin in being able to share this with as many people as possible, really, because we're very keen to ensure that people understand what is truly happening in digital health, way beyond all the funding headlines that we keep getting. So the platform is global coverage. So we cover Asia Pacific, Middle East, Israel, Western Europe, North America, and South America. It's 250 million plus data points. For that, you have roughly at the moment an analysis that considers some 14,000 digital ventures across the globe. And for each venture, it's looking at funding, of course. I mean, we could not look at funding, but really more importantly, looking at what partnerships they've built, both with academia as well as with corporations, what clinical evidence they've got by way of filings and regulations, what therapeutic areas they're focused in, who they're working with to scale, etc. So it's really trying to address in a few clicks, really, all of the critical early stage due diligence, any corporation looking to partner, or any investor wishing to invest, or even any startup wishing to understand the landscape needs by way of answers to their questions. Hopefully I've summarized it ably this in a few words.
And this is a global thing, so I'm assuming there's a piece of tech behind all of this that's managing a lot of these data sets and giving you the summaries and giving us the ability to create the reports. Is that right?
No, absolutely. And so, I founded a company in Singapore to address a pain point, which was really about the fact that no one really understood what sort of innovation was going on in Asia Pacific and who was doing what with who. And no real sources existed that addressed that particular challenge. And so I founded Galen Growth and built a team in Singapore trying to overcome the usual challenges in Asia Pacific, which is a lot of countries, very fragmented, somewhat opaque, a lot of language barriers, and therefore how do we overcome all of these barriers to really still be able to bring together all those data points? And so we got really, really good at leveraging technology to access this information, aggregate this information, validate it, triangulate it, and of course then share it with the many users of the platform. So yes, we have a fairly large tech team now, mostly sitting in India. And we have a sizable research data team sitting in Singapore. We also have obviously a small team sitting in Basel, where the birds are not tweeting. It's pitch dark here. And a team in Chicago looking after our US clients.
Gil, turning to you, quick introduction, please, and then just around the report itself and the numbers that have been reported.
Yeah, first of all, I like to best be known as friend of Ritesh, a person who often is standing behind him. I'm wheeling his bag through airports, clearing the way for him so he can get to his plane on time. That's really my major function. But when Ritesh is not on the road, he's not doing webinars. We're colleagues, obviously. I'm privileged to be the chair of the Global Health and Purpose at Fin Partners. And I primarily see our role as championing health innovation and enabling it to navigate through a very fragmented health ecosystem. And for that reason, first of all, I consider myself a great ally, an advocate, a fan of Julien and Galen Growth. And I really want to dive into that fully, because I'm, as a writer, I'm editor-in-chief also of a large platform with about 68,000 readers a month called Medica Life. And we report quite a bit about health innovation and digital health innovation. I'm one of the editors of that section. And obviously, I get a chance to pour through a tremendous amount of data from different enterprises that are punching out reports. It's very popular right now to punch out a report, to have a list of influencers, top 10, top 15, top 25, top 50. Everybody who's on this call probably has been on one of those lists. But the Galen Growth Report for me is a game changer. And I really want to speak to why. And I also want to say that it's a collaboration. There's no economic tie here. So I want to make it perfectly clear that my comments are without incentive. The incentive is to champion health innovation. So I also have a background in private equity, having been a portfolio CEO in one of this country's largest private equity groups, GTCR. That's a great privilege. And so I have a different perspective about data. And so a lot of the reports I'm reading right now, Ritesh, Julien, and I thank you, and Cheryl, who lives and breathes this, a lot of the reports I read, the headline is less money invested in 2022, or fewer deals done in 2022. That's the headline. That's not the headline, everybody. Stop that. Stop that. Galen Growth, actually, this report is a deep dive into, as Julien said, 250 million data points. And what I'm looking for as I'm advising clients on all different issues is one, where, at what stage is the money going? So if I actually would look at an aggregate of value of investment in 2022 compared to 2020, 2021, I'd actually say the value of the dollar going into digital health is greater last year than it was the year before. Why? The cost of getting into an investment in 2021 was high because they were going into later stage investments that had effect higher valuations. And in order to get a piece of the action, you had to pony up more money. But if you look at the Galen Growth Report, you're seeing a unique shift. Investors are coming in at earlier stages to gain voice, equity, and direction of that enterprise, coming in on a Series A or a Series B, or even a pre-Series seed funding aspect to get a seat at the table means you spend less money, you get more voice. And so by looking at the Galen Growth Report, I'm seeing that actually more investors are coming into the category. They're actually seeking something different. They understand the dilemma of the category. Now, to that point, what we've seen in digital health is not the ability to invent, it's the ability to innovate. They're different. Everybody has an invention, right? Here's an invention. If you can see it here, my Apple Newton. I love it. I don't use it anymore, but I have it still just in case someone like Ritesh says, I need an Apple Newton quickly. I always have it. But the reality is it was a great invention. The market didn't pick it up. What it did pick up was this innovation, the Palm Pilot. And so what I see sometimes in the data is the reason they're coming in earlier is they're understanding that digital health is having a challenge getting reimbursement. They want more influence into the proof of outcomes, of value, and all that. So again, I use the report, particularly the year-end report of 2022, as really solid direction, navigation through the system. I'll stop there. I want to make sure that Cheryl, who's really in the game of investment, can offer her insights on the report. And actually, she can say, I don't agree with Gil. I always invite people to disagree with me. There's a long
I never
list.
agree with you.
No,
so
there's a
it's
long
okay.
line outside my door of disagreement.
There you go. And I'm sure
the
there'll
problem
be
is they have
people in the
baseball
chat.
bats. That's what scares me.
Cheryl, thank you. Thank you, Gil. That's really good. So Cheryl, you're an investor. You look at this data, you look at companies. Do you agree with Gil? Did things sort of change a bit, or are you seeing a different story here?
Well, so first of all, Happy New Year, everybody.
Yes.
I think I can still
Please
say
tell
that.
us a little bit about you, by the way, and when Vive Collective got started.
Yeah. So I manage Vive Collective. We invest exclusively in digital health in some health tech opportunities. We have a pretty unique capital platform. We're pretty flexible, so we can do the early stage, which now I know Gil really likes, but we also have the ability to flex up to later stage rounds as part of our capital partnership with Clear Lake Capital, which is a large private equity fund. And so we really love the ability to be flexible. To Gil's point, there are a lot of opportunities there, and we think that 2023 in particular is going to be a banner year for what we call creative deals. A lot of the data that we saw in the Galen report is great for helping us understand like where money is discretely being funneled into. And then I think if you read later into the report, there's some interesting data around M&A. And we think that M&A will actually be also a big harbinger for seeing consolidation, not just because people financially need to consolidate, but it actually strategically makes a lot of sense. And when you see the private markets contract in venture and private equity, it actually opens up an interesting opportunity for real platforms to emerge through M&A, as well as also just like mergers of equals. So anyways, that's what we focus on, a combination of investing, company building, all with the lens of how can we move the needle in digital health.
It's funny how John Noster's asked a really interesting question, which dovetails from the three of you starting off. Everybody struggles with this, and you saw the valuation numbers last year. How is it changing? Has much changed in the way you're evaluating and the valuation itself of a startup, Cheryl? Do they differ based on the individuals that you're talking to, the product they have, and how much money they're raising? Is that the sort of the formula?
So I think there's a formula for every stage. So what you expect from a founder and in a company coming out to raise seed money is going to be very different than what you expect from somebody who's raising a Series D, Series E. At the early stage, it's always going to be founder driven, right?
Yeah.
Like, you never know when you go out of the gate in a certain space who's going to be the winner. So you're really kind of backing a founder and a team more than anything else. And then as the company gets more mature, there's a lot more to underwrite. I think one of the things that you see in the data from the Galen report that I thought was interesting is if you look across the years, and I think it goes back to like 2018 through 2022, I think you could basically say statistically 2021 was just an anomaly. If you take that out, the investment pace in digital health is actually relatively steady across all the different stages. For some reason, the end of 2020 into 2021, you just saw this balloon, particularly in the Series B, Series C, Series D. And if you remove those bars from the graph, it actually looks kind of steady as it is. So I tell founders, just try to forget that 2021 existed. Like, it just wasn't there. And like, don't compare what your friends were able to do in 2021 versus what you think you should have been able to do in 2022 or 2023. You have to have a longer historical horizon. And if you do that, I think everyone will get back to company building principles, which is, to me, by the Series A, you should have an early sense of product market fit. By the Series B, you should absolutely have it. You need capital to start to scale. And by Series C, your unit economics should be absolutely worked out, and investors should be underwriting against that. I think all of those principles sort of got thrown out the window in 2021, and we're all sort of getting back to it. So your question around, are we underwriting differently? Yes, if you compare to 2021, but should we have done what we did in 2021? Probably not.
Yeah.
And so we're kind of going back to fundamentals.
Cheryl, I couldn't agree with you more. I think that this part of the transcript, if there's a transcript, has to be put out sort of like as almost like watchwords for our category. It's exuberant investing. And, I sort of joked around, I posted on social media a picture of me in a NASCAR racing suit, sort of saying the need for speed. I want to let our category off the hook a little bit, but not quite. I think that COVID created this environment that suddenly the medical system was, if it's fragmented, it was fragmented and separated. So patients couldn't get to doctors, and doctors had no way of connecting with their patients. So I think that the exuberant investment was almost like, quick, let's throw water on a fire. Let's not think about where the water is coming from. Let's not think about the direction we're throwing it. Throw money into the category. And I think your point, which is, we've suddenly sort of stepped back and started to say, what's really going on here? And back to the report, what I found super interesting in the report, I hope they'll provide a download link while we're chatting to someone, but what I found super interesting in the report is not, forget about the numbers, whether they're high or low. I looked at the therapeutic categories where money was going. That to me was mission critical. How the investment in health innovation or technology was complementing the innovation in therapeutic categories like oncology, for instance. I found that to be a really important guide, creatively, investment, and also in terms of systems. I looked at also to get a sense of what countries were centers of the beneficiary of the economics. So for instance, the United States, which is the biggest single market in the world, saw this economic decline, but the rest of the world did not. In some cases, popped up a little bit. So for instance, Europe, stable. Israel, which is a key hub of innovation, kind of up a little bit. It's about 92% of pre-COVID levels. So you look at those numbers and you say to yourself, gee, why didn't they go down? And it's because they have concentrations. I mean, for me, I don't know if Julian's able to produce this. I'm asking you a question, not putting you on the spot. I'd be curious to see in the United States, if it were possible to track going forward, how about investment in Boston as opposed to investment in, let's say, New York City? I don't know why. I think we're going to find, if we look at it, investment in Boston dropped less than, let's say, investment in San Francisco. But I think that the data are really to be poured.
Well, I think, and I think it's probably, sorry, Julien, it's probably not investment, but a source of funding or places where people have funds, right? Traditionally, it has been Silicon Valley or Boston in the US, but you're seeing Knoxville, Nashville, places are starting to pop up, Austin, Texas, where people are located, right? Sorry, Julien, carry on.
Well, I was going to just suggest that looking at Boston versus California, all will be revealed next week when we publish our deep dive into the North American digital health ecosystem. So the report we're talking about today is the global view, but we, Galen Growth, will publish a deep dive into each of those 5 regional ecosystems Gil was referring to earlier on. Listen, valuations, I don't believe 2021 valuations were really based on any
to Cheryl's point,
realistic,
right? Forget 21.
Which is what Cheryl was saying. And so, yes, 21 is clearly an anomaly. We're back to reality. And yes, we closed, globally closed ahead of 2020. So things are showing good resilience in the digital health market, and so it should. Now, we're moving away from the great story that used to underpin the valuation and the funding into proof points or fundamentals, as Cheryl was saying, and those proof points are quite clear. What's the clinical evidence that a digital health venture has? Can it really do what it's claiming to do? Can it prove that it can do it? That it has a great team, that it's increasingly getting into environments where there's reimbursement, and of course, unit economics are important. And so I think for us at Galen Growth, 2022 just has been an acceleration of maturity in the digital health ecosystem as a whole, whereby we're going from a cottage industry that has tens of thousands of digital health ventures, some of them doing exactly the same thing as the other one next door, exaggerate slightly, but not enormously. And so we're going to see that consolidation. We're going to see that strengthening of the pipeline. So it's for the benefit of patients, it's for the benefit of all the stakeholders in digital health, to see that particular maturity, or that inflection point, I guess, the maturity occurring as it has and will continue to occur going forwards.
So you're saying if I have this great idea, Cheryl, about the new mental health app I want to do, you may not want to think about that one, right? Because I think the market for mental health last year just boomed, right?
It did. So I want to, there was one piece of data, I can't remember which slide it was, where there was a series of graphs that showed different therapeutic areas in the change in investment from 21 to 22. And I know it looks very bleak, but one of the things I wanted to point out was I actually feel that comparing one year to the next year isn't fair, because everybody who raised money in 21 should have enough money to get through 22. And so you would naturally see a decline in new investment in a category if it was super highly funded the year before, because that money needs to work through operation. Now, the question will be, the companies that were funded in 2020, 2019 and 2020, are they actually getting follow-on rounds? So I think absolute dollars is one indicator. The deeper indicator is like, where do follow-on dollars follow, as opposed to, and where is it getting, which types of companies are they getting consolidated into? So I think as a multi-stage investor, one of the things that, like, I don't necessarily care that mental health had less money. I'm just looking for the players that are going to bubble up to the top and going to win. And we're still very bullish that mental health is a category to invest in, because as we can see in the news every day, like, behavioral health issues are not going away. And if anything, we need solutions that address different ethnic groups, different slices of the population. Like there is no one size fits all problem, and solution, and the problem pervades everywhere. One thing I did want to make sure that we have a chance to discuss, because I think this is very top of mind to both founders as well as investors, is a question that John brought up in the chat around low valuations.
Yeah,
and is this
I was just going to get that. So
risk
great.
tolerance, et cetera. So my concern in the market right now is I do think valuations are going to come down. I do think it's healthy for them to come down, because you cannot be valued at a multiple so high off your revenue that you will never grow into that valuation.
Agreed.
The challenge for founders, and I sympathize with this, is that you can't just say, well, then instead of raising 15 million, I'll raise 10 million because I want to anchor against 20% dilution in the round. And so, because when you build the operating plan, it doesn't foot. Like the problem is we are dealing in an inflationary environment. This is outside of healthcare. Compensation levels are not coming down as quickly as valuations are coming down. So founders are stuck in a position where they have to do more with less, knowing that they can't pay people necessarily the difference between what their change in valuation is. So this is where founders are taking the squeeze. And it's real. And it's unfortunate. I think what you'll see is you'll see rounds being raised at the same amount, but with more dilution than you saw before, or you'll see structure in deals in late stage that help investors offset that risk tolerance because there's some downside protection. And this is going to be a metric that we won't see come out in the market for a couple quarters because that data won't be published yet.
But question for you, Cheryl, on that. I mean,
yeah.
We're certainly seeing a downward trend in terms of valuations, particularly at the late stage side of digital health, of venture funding. And there's talk of it having returned back to 2019 levels. But what I'm worried about is that we're also seeing a lot of debt financing coming in because investors are afraid to really address a valuation question. And therefore, are we therefore really prolonging the pain by at some stage really realizing the valuation downtrend down the road because no one really wants to take it on now?
And what about the unicorns, Cheryl? We've had a few unicorns over the last year and a half, right? 21, 22. Are there those valuations under scrutiny as well, do you think? We've seen some layoffs from some of these unicorns as they, as you rightly said, squeeze the pay scales and look at their staffing and ratios and looking at their forward plans. But it's not going to impact them as much as maybe some of the newcomers who maybe raised Series A and are now looking for B and C. What do you think? I
actually think there's less compression in the seed and Series A because you can only compress so much, right? And the investors usually don't use structure in deal frames in the early stage because it's not the last round. But if you think it's going to be the last round, like a Series D or a Series E, then you're looking for some downside protection. I also think that we talk about companies just being built as companies, but these are organizations that are alive. And if they were geared for growth versus geared for profitability, they hired different people. Yeah. They set their forecasts differently. They prioritize product roadmap differently. Everything is different. And so it's right now, a lot of the late stage companies are having to retool themselves for profitability instead of growth, which was the original mandate when they raised money in 2021. So going through that restructuring, it's extremely painful, right? It's not something that you can just do on a dime. And so I think we need to wait and see how all of that restructuring comes through the market, and then the fundraising, whether that's through debt or through equity, how that follows the companies that have gone through the restructuring. Unicorns, I mean, literally and figuratively, is a fictitious thing, right? It's just an arbitrary number that was put out there, and it's a great benchmark. But I actually think that some of the smartest founders don't fixate on that, right? Like you can't fixate on it, and you actually don't want your employees to fixate on the
No.
fact that like
Yeah.
they work at a unicorn. So I think the ones that did cross over into unicorn status, they must have been showing some level of growth despite kind of macro market dynamics that allowed them to command that valuation, because all investors are going back to financial principles now. And so they are looking at revenue and profitability.
Which
No,
sort of opens up, Gil, you know, sorry, I think you were
yeah,
about to say
I just,
something, Gil.
Ritesh, finish your thought, and I want to just sort of comment on what Cheryl and Julien just said. A combo thought.
I think it's a combination of two things, right? I think Paolo put on the chat, there's this FOMO thing that will happen, right? Yeah, there's a huge amount of money that was going into, oh, we got to do digital health. Health is booming. Let's go. I remember meeting people who had nothing to do with health, all of a sudden having a fund of 100 million to go do something, right? So is this opening up the opportunity for M&A for some of the big corporates to now look at picking off some of the undervalued?
Yeah, Ritesh, I think that big corporates, I want to stay with what Cheryl and Julien just said, because I think in their words, it responds to your question in a unique way. I think that what happened was in 2022 was sort of like the spillover exuberance all of a sudden hit the wall. And 2021 was this FOMO. I've got to be in there. I've got to be in the category. And this looks really hot. It looks like a unicorn. I'm in at some wacko evaluation. Yeah. Cheryl is spot on. I think what happened at the end of 2021 into 2022 is it shifted from the wow of the idea, like, isn't this a great idea? Like, and I'm going to do this. Wow.
I'm going to get this many eyeballs, right?
Eyeballs. And I think that, first of all, I just want to sort of dissect this as a communicator. I think that actually, because I've been in these rooms, sometimes I hear investors use their clout to say to founders, you need more eyeballs. What's your social media campaign? What's your marketing campaign? Where sometimes as a communicator who's dedicated to the space, I'm saying, what's your operational plan to sort of like prove your value to the system, and how you're connecting fragmented points of information or customers together to improve the flow or the supply chain of care and connectivity between patient and provider and payer. So I think what happens is you get investors sometimes saying, I want to push this, I want to make this hot, and I want to exit like really quickly, and that creates the spiral of valuation. But this actually taking your eye off the ball, that it's always going to be about value and operations. And I think that the M&A is really going to have to really drive home if we're looking at acquisition or consolidation of the market. I often in my travels of the world see 3 ventures in the course of a day that are doing almost the same thing. And I say to them, I've got to, as someone who's been in the acquisition world, I've got to say, have you 3, I know I met with someone, I don't divulge the name, I met with someone who's doing something similar. Would you ever be interested in meeting them and seeing if you should come together under one umbrella and pool your talent and assets? So part of it is the culture of unicorn is uni. It's forget about the corn part. I'm going to do it myself. And so we've also created a culture accidentally, not by desire, that lacks collaboration. And I actually do think that some of these ideas that I see in some of these people I meet, and their intent is so pure and so great to help people live better lives, but their investors are latching onto them as soloists. And so these investors who intuitively, or these founders who intuitively might be collaborative, are kept apart from each other. So I think that what I'm hearing from Cheryl and Julien, I see in the numbers in the report, is actually a cultural phenomena as well, as I look at the data.
Is it cultural or is it by design? Because you see a lot of point solutions, if you wish, that have been funded, it's cultural, right?
I'm gonna push back, and here's what I say. Having been in the, I'll term this, and I'm very curious to get Cheryl's reaction here. I was involved in roll-ups, and for those who are not familiar with roll-ups, It's an idea. They bring in a CEO, is a big idea. And the idea is to
And then
consolidate-
Cheryl's bag of money funds
Yeah,
it.
sure. I hope so. And I want to consolidate laundromats because
Yeah.
everybody goes into a laundromat. There's the different machines, they're out of repair, they have different marketing. I'm going to create the biggest laundromat chain in the United States. I'll buy bulk, I'll have technicians, they'll
Yeah.
travel around, boom. That's a roll up. Now, what happens is we talked about mental health, the disparities, the diversity, behavioral, CBT, analytic, cognitive, everybody's doing their own venture. I think that eventually Cheryl is going to have to sit back as a result of this conversation and say, I think I'll consolidate. And we need bold
And
investors.
you don't think Cheryl's already thought of that, right?
Oh, I think Cheryl has. She's done 5 consolidations before
Exactly.
this webinar.
Yeah.
So, Cheryl,
look,
what do you think?
As somebody who has done M&A advisory and who's also been a shareholder of companies who have been acquired, I think that there is a hubris of investors and advisors that like, you know what, like this puzzle piece really fits really well with this other puzzle piece and like it should just happen. The reality is like M&A is a emotional process as well as it is a financial process. And it's hard, right? The other thing is we underestimate like the need to do true integration after M&A. So like I appreciate like from a corporate's perspective, you know, you see all these point solutions to Ritesh's point, like sitting out there and it's like, well, maybe we should buy them. But is the value that they delivered still as high once they're in the tent versus if they're outside? And that's like a legitimate question.
Yeah.
And then do we even have the resources to integrate the things that we buy? So it's only part about valuation. Like, you know, I agree, like it would be great to kind of have more critical mass among fewer players in the market. But I'm always very cautious with my founders around saying you should tether yourself to another startup. The reason why the private equity groups do the roll-ups that they do is because they already know what the unit economics should be on every business, and that playbook is already built, and you can only do a roll-up once you know how that playbook is going to become profitable. In the early stage, you can't do it because you're inventing something new and you're actually trying to change behavior while you're doing that, whether this is patient behavior, buyer behavior, IT behavior, whatever it is. And so to tether multiple things that are all trying to survive is actually really risky. So I can see why it's difficult to do. I do think that there will be this dislocation in the market right now does present an opportunity. So I think it's super interesting to watch. And there will be players that kind of like bubble up to the top, and you know, that's what we're watching for sure. But
Julien, I think, Cheryl, you've got a great point there around what's happening in the market. If I may, I'd like you to take us there a little bit, because you're right. You know, there's so much that went in. The FOMO thing happened in 21. We got a little bit of balancing out in 22. Julien, in the data that you guys are going, what are you seeing? Some of the trends, some categories or some M&A or partnerships. What are some of the trends that you guys are seeing in the data that you're sort of churning out at the moment?
So are you looking at 2022 rather than, I guess, 23? Well, you know, as Gil said, it's a really positive trend that we think. We're certainly seeing that the majority, as a 60% plus of the M&A activity digital health is venture to venture. So I think it's starting to echo a little bit what Cheryl's talking about, where it's probably market conditions forcing it, but it's certainly looking at how do you address a potential element of a patient journey or across a specific disease area, and start putting together the building blocks to be able to present that hopefully seamless value proposition to the patient. Because at the moment, the patient needs to do that painful setting between various digital ventures in order to try and manage a specific disease. So that's positive. I think we'll continue seeing that, to echo the many dynamics we talked about in terms of restructuring, in terms of running out of money and having to do something about it. The analysis we did of the 14,000 ventures and how many of them actually got funded in the last 18 months, it's 25%. So that means there's 75% additional ventures out there that did not raise funding in the last 18 months. It's certainly focusing leadership teams as well as existing investors behind those particular ventures. But the other really exciting trend we've seen is partnerships. So moving away from investors, really looking at what the strategics are doing with respect to their engagement with digital health, and I guess what digital health ventures are doing to try and scale by working on a B2B2P model. We have actually seen partnership numbers grow substantially in 2022. So if you look at the number of partnerships disclosed in 2022 versus 2021, it's a growth of 1.5x. And so the climate, the volatility of geopolitical as well as economical over the last 12 to 18 months has not scared off the insurers, the pharmaceutical companies, the medical device companies, etc., in wanting to identify the right digital venture to address a pain point and structuring a partnership. So that's very exciting, and we expect to see that continue, because if nothing else, if we look at the pharmacos alone, something like 15 pharmacos are accountable for over 50% of all digital venture partnerships disclosed across the globe, which means that there's a very long tail of pharmaceutical companies that at this stage have hardly even engaged with digital health, even though digital health is rewriting the healthcare value chain.
It's funny, I raised that at CNS Summit last year, where I asked the pharma guys why they were even bothering doing digital therapeutics, because they couldn't organize a party in a brewery. So I'm glad to see that they're actually doing something now. We have on the call, I know we have a bunch of pharma folks, innovation people within the pharma industry. I can point to a few I can see on there that I know personally. So let's talk about the pharma guys. Gil, can pharma do this? Is it a partnership model or is it an acquisition model? Does the pharma company's balance sheets enable them now to maybe go out and pick off a few things and maybe actually do something in digital?
So the answer is yes, yes, and yes. I think that there are some pharma companies that are hiring in the right talent and the right experience. They're probably
look at Ed Cox, who's just gone to Pfizer.
Ed Cox at Pfizer, but I think that probably that you're going to get like Merck calling Cheryl up after this call and just saying, what does it take to get you inside of Merck to be our global head of digital?
$2 billion.
Right. I could see that happening. So I think that they no longer see digital as a toy. The other aspect is that they see digital addressing some very pressing pain points. I'll give you an example, clinical trial recruitment, of understanding digital health marketing, of looking at diverse patient communities, remote patients participating in trials. Where do we invest in infrastructure that we offer sites in terms of remote patient monitoring, accessing portals and things of that nature? I think that necessity is the parent of all invention. And I think that the pharmaceutical industry is uniquely adept at looking at its economic pain points, its gaps, and its solutions. So I could see the following, Ritesh. I could see them looking at certain companies and establishing economic strategic alliances, not as investors, but as economic partners in big projects. That's one. Two, to Julien's point, the pharmaceutical industry has barely scratched the surface of this concept, because the discipline of market leaders says we make drugs or we make molecules. That's what we focus on. Now, the question is, if that's their drive, we make molecules, how do we accelerate drug discovery? How do we accelerate drug development? And that's where augmented intelligence is going to come in, and investments like that. So I can see quite bluntly, a mega company, I won't mention any names, sitting down with a Microsoft or sitting down with a Google, sitting down with an Amazon and just saying, hey, how about we work together on our drug discovery effort? We'll do all the heavy lifting and insight. You provide digital infrastructure. That's barely happening right now. That's scary. The other aspect is in terms of adherence. The biggest economic gap, or one of the biggest economic gaps that the pharmaceutical industry and the payers actually face, because disease is expensive. Disease is more expensive than treatment, is the pharmaceutical industry stepping in with payers and digital adherence solutions to say, hey, put our drug on formulary in a great slot. And guess what? We've got this program that will drive adherence.
Sort of the patient support adherence.
Right. And we barely have
financial
touched all that.
services.
So I
Okay.
think when I look at the report, again, I constantly go back to the report. Julian's the one who should be doing that, not me, but I love the report and I use the report for strategic decision-making. When you look at the report itself, you see the gaps of where these relationships are not being leveraged to the fullest. And I actually do think that the pharmaceutical industry, the biotech industry, and actually the medical device industry is going to come in big and strong to try to figure this out. They're sitting on a lot of capital. They're sitting on a lot of capital.
But they also have the infrastructure, right? They have the sales and
exactly that.
marketing
And these
infrastructure.
little companies have no infrastructure.
Just
they
think
have
of Pfizer's
inventors,
distribution, right?
engineers. Absolutely, you nailed it.
Cheryl, what do you think? Do you think, you're talking to, I'm sort of all sorts of people. Is pharma in your radar? Are they starting to sort of bubble up in some of the things that you're looking at?
So they are, absolutely. And I think, to pharma's credit, a lot of the big pharma companies have investment pools of capital that they've dedicated and carved out, and they have great resources that are put against it. One of our mandates and one of my personal goals this year is to, as an investor, as a financial investor, be a bridge for pharma companies to say, how can we collaborate? And we provide capital, a more arm's length view for innovation, things that can work up and down your stack from whether this is the clinical side or the commercial side, whether this is around kind of data infrastructure, all the way to, patient engagement. Where can we build companies together? And in some cases, this is engaging the business unit and saying, hey, we've got some great ideas. We have some great companies for you to take a look at. How can you partner, to Julian's point? In other cases, this is actually engaging maybe even the CFO's office to say, listen, we can really move the needle in patient services, for example, if we build a company together, and we'll do all the corporate structuring, we'll do all the
due diligence and everything.
Lifting, we know how to structure those deals. We do those things, but have a seat at the table with us from the very beginning. And we're always looking for pharma companies that are more forward leaning, that want to take that initiative. And that doesn't mean they need to earmark $60 million from day one in one deal to be able to do it, right? Even, $5-10 million is more than enough. And, to Gil's point, we know they have money. But we're looking for that thought collaboration from day one. And I think that's where some of these creative deals will get done this year. And there's a real opportunity for that. So I think pharma could be in a great spot. I mean, I much rather be in pharma's seat right now than, a CMIO or a CIO
Exactly.
health system. They're really feeling pain. So, so I think it could be a great time.
Super. Thank you. So we've got 10 minutes to go. I'm cognizant there's so many questions coming through. Maybe we'll get to one or two of those, but we've talked about 21 and 22. We've talked about the report. For those listening, there is a link in the invite, but we will forward the link to you to download this report if you haven't seen it after this webinar. There is also the recording of this webinar that we will send to you after this webinar as well, if you want to relive these moments and listen to Cheryl all over again. A couple of things to talk about for 23 as you've started to go there. Julien and then Gil, what are we looking at for 23? People are talking, oh, deals are getting low, no money going in. Are we seeing that as a trend? Number one. Number two, Julien, you mentioned more around evidence-based things. I think Paulo Machado has put a great question in the Q&A, which is, they're focused on the profit ROI. Should we get them to take the Hippocratic Oath as well as a startup? Right. So maybe there's something there. But what are you seeing?
I think he was saying investors should take it, right?
That's a great idea, Cheryl. I'm going to
I'm not sure about.
I have two MDs on my team, and they've already taken it. So
there you go. So Paulo, there you go. Cheryl's already way ahead of you. So we've answered that question live. So Julien, what are you seeing? And then, you know, you guys carry on after that.
So 23, yeah, crystal ball time. You know, I think we will continue to see some of the themes that Cheryl and Galen and myself have shared already, which is, you know, a focus on fundamentals and proof points. So really around clinical evidence, around unit economics, around whether reimbursement codes exist, and hopefully health systems will come to play, or regulators will come to play there. And around making sure, to Cheryl's point, the right team is in place to actually grow a profitable business rather than grow at all cost. So we'll see a lot of that. We're going to see some more pain though first, because too few of the digital ventures actually raised in the last 18 months. You know, I think a lot of them thought the music would just keep on going. And so they're going to have to get quite creative as to how they keep the lights on and keep going forwards. We at Galen Growth expect more M&A to go on between ventures, driving hopefully towards platform, as in digital health solutions that are able to address a patient's journey throughout a particular therapeutic disease area, for example, or maybe you know, cross-border, or even starting to bolt on other capabilities to existing capability, you know, as in a telehealth starting to look further on into the patient journey, for example. We'll see pharmaceuticals, for example, continuing to really investigate the R and the D side of their value chain and how digital plays a role in that. We talked a lot about clinical trials today, but you know, we shouldn't forget that you know, biotech's R&D, or R, should I say, productivity continues to head towards the floorboards, let's say, and therefore, you know, they really are looking at, in bioinformatics, looking at AI, looking at omics as ways of really powering their research divisions, and so we'll see continued investment there. So for us, it is continuing to watch these particular points. Yes, we got ahead in 22 by, for example, undertaking a full analysis of all 14,000 digital ventures that we have on our database, and looking at their clinical evidence. In other words, what filings they've made, what approvals they've received, what clinical trials they're running, what peer-reviewed publications they've made, etc. So all the indicators that they are trying to demonstrate that they can actually solve the medical pain point they're trying to solve, rather than talking a great story. And I'm hoping, for example, the greater involvement of pharmaceutical companies and the greater focus by investors on these fundamental means we'll see more of that. Because at the moment, the analysis shows that about 20% of the digital health ecosystem across the globe of digital ventures have actually got any type of noteworthy clinical evidence. The rest is pretty much pretty poor at this stage. But the overall message from us is that we are at the inflection point, and we are seeing a strengthening of the overall pipeline, which can only be for the benefit of investors, founders, pharmaceutical companies, and ultimately, of course, health systems and patients.
Gil?
I'm going to pick up on that. So Julien, I'm going to start with the word you sort of began with, pain. I don't want to rush by it. With pain comes great opportunity to separate the great from the good. And I think that what I've seen in the past where a lot of founders have gotten away with it is there's the mistaken theory that a 510K is a pathway to the market. It is not, period. FDA approval to market a digital health application or some form of new medical device that's digitally enabled is not a signal that you're going to be successful. So we've talked a little bit about early stage ideas, inventions, but I really want to just focus in and take what you said and go to the I'm getting ready for market. I think the pathway to get the FDA in this country to nod and just say, yes, we see this as being beneficial. It's not dangerous. Why don't you go and sell it? And what people forget to consider, whether it was a great year or a poor year, and now is the time to consider in the pain year, is the fact that payers often say when a doctor suggests something that's prescription oriented, a digital health application that's a prescription, the payer's response is insufficient evidence, denied. That was happening, by the way, in 2021 and 2022.
And 22, yeah.
Yes, but in a painful year, you can't afford that to happen. So I want to pick up from what you've said, the importance of data, where you said that you see very few companies investing in producing sufficient data and investing in clinical connections, thought leader support, science, peer review presentations at major medical meetings, peer review papers, all of that. People have forgotten that the Center for Medicare and Medicaid Beneficiary Services, CMS, and most of the valid, significant payers in this nation and in Europe and in Israel all require some form of outcomes data. They don't see that. And so guess what? Speed to market is like exuberance investing. It doesn't work. Only the hardy will survive. So one, have a real plan. Two, I don't see a category in 2021 or 2022 really think through reimbursement strategy. I think that this time of sort of like go slow quickly, which is 2023, I'll define it that way, go slow quickly, is to sit back and reflect and take a good analysis of why have all the other ventures burnt upon launch, many of them did, and say to yourselves, gee, with the resources I have, where do I want to place my bets? And I would say, place your bets in investing in your benefit, your defined benefit, your market differentiation, how you actually help the system improve care even better than before. That would be my advice on 2023. I think it's a painful year, but I think for the smart players, smart founders who really take the effort, they will succeed.
So we've got a few more minutes. What will Cheryl say at the end as the last word before I answer a few questions?
I think 2023 is going to be a lot of continued pain. I think that we're going to see macroeconomic outside of healthcare pressure. And as an investor, what I'll say is my expectation is that sales cycles are going to be longer. I think that sales terms are going to be harder to control and to get. And so as a result, when I look at forecasts, they're going to be lower than what is shown on a deck, which has that cascading impact on valuation and operating plans and on and on and on. So I think that's going to be a problem. The thing, in addition to reimbursement path that hasn't been figured out, I think a lot of companies haven't thought through sustainable distribution either. So this is where I think partnerships could be really valuable, whether that's, if it makes sense for your company to partner with pharma, great. If it's with a payer, great, like whatever it is. But owning your user and customer and having an owned proprietary distribution path through to that end user is really, really critical. Yeah. And this is where like a lot of investment dollars went to acquiring. And if that's going to go away and you need to be much more surgical about how you lock up distribution, that needs to happen. And that will come through in the operating plan in numbers. But I think founders really need to think about that and need to communicate where that differentiation comes through to their investors and to their customers actually as well. So I think that's really, really important to reset in this year, to build long-term healthy businesses. So I'll leave it at that. I mean, it's not, I wish we could paint a rosier picture for 2023.
Well,
But
John
I actually
Noster's
think
very
it's
confused
gonna
at the
be
moment, so I'm
bumpy.
going to have John sort of reach out to Julien and Gil directly afterwards, and then to you. So, but I'm sorry to cut you off, Cheryl, but it's
Yeah,
101.
no.
We're seeing people dropping off already. So
Yeah.
thank you so much to all three of you for taking the time today and spending an hour with us. Thank you to everybody who was on this. For Paolo, John, Terry, Arthur, all of you guys who asked the questions that we didn't get to, my apologies, but we had an hour. We'll try and do it 2 hours next time. Don't forget, the next webinar in this is on February 28th, where we are going to talk about the future of the pharmacy and how the digital world is going to change the way the pharmacy is providing services. So look forward to that. With that, thank you all for joining us.